Hello teachers, and welcome back to WeTeach.U. In this tutorial that is addressed to school teachers K-12, all subjects, all levels, we're going to focus on classroom and lesson planning, student feedback, assessment and reports equally, and the structure of the tutorial is going to be like this. First of all, we explain what prompting is, then we explain the 4 C's and show you 6 live demos. Each one of the demo targets one of the teaching tasks, such as a lesson planning, student feedback, assessment reports, and so on and so forth. And last, we're going to discuss some of the common mistakes that teachers commit, and then we come to a close of the tutorial session. Today, I'm going to show you the exact same request, and I need to send it to Claude twice. The first request is the following: make a quiz about the water cycle. That's the first request. While waiting for the first request to get the result, I mean the quiz or the output, I'm going to give Claude another request that is much more detailed, much clearer than the first one. So I need to compare between the output resulting from a prompt like make a quiz about the water cycle and a detailed prompt that asks Claude to provide a teacher, for example, teaching grade 6 science, and this prompt, the second prompt, explains exactly what students did the period before the preparation of the quiz. So my students, that's the first, that's a quiz about the water cycle. So you have general question, the process, what's the process called when the sun heats water and turn it into vapor. I need to download the tests, and I can ask Claude to provide me. We can download it as an HTML, copy it, and give it to student interactively. So here I'll have the full quiz designed by Claude. I'll place it here, and then I'll ask Claude to provide me with a quiz, a 10-question quiz that specifically targets those misconceptions, like, for example, after I taught my student a unit on the water cycle for 2 weeks, and after they understood evaporation and condensation, but consistently I noticed that they confuse between precipitation and collection, I want you to create a 10-question quiz that specifically targets these 2 misconceptions, and I want you to include 2 diagram labeling questions and end with 1 open-ended reflection question. I also provided Claude with further details, such as the language that I want you to use, and the task has to be simple and age appropriate. So this is the second prompt. As you see, it has details. So in the first prompt, I didn't specify the grade level. I didn't specify exactly what I'm teaching in the water cycle. In the second one, I provided Claude with all the details, how long students have been studying the water cycle, what exactly I'm teaching them, and the areas in which they are having this confusion between precipitation and collection. I also specified the number of questions. It's a 10-question quiz, and I need to target mainly the two misconceptions. And in some of the questions in two, for example, I need two questions where students have to label diagrams, and the last questions are going to be open-ended reflection questions. And I need the language to be simple and age appropriate. So we're waiting for the second test to be processed. And at this time, we can open the water cycle quiz, the previous one, the one that is done without any specification. So here, if I choose a question, then I have directly the right question highlighted in green, and I have the wrong question highlighted in red. So I'm choosing randomly, and I'm moving from one question to another just to show you how the questions are general. So if you read the questions, you will notice that there are general questions about water cycle, and these general questions cannot be targeting a specific group of students with specific areas of knowledge about the text. So here I did the task, I got a score on the task, and I can try this test again because it's interactive as usually done by Claude. So here I have my test ready. I can download the test, and I can show you exactly how the test differs between the first prompt and the second prompt. So here, let's have a look at the second test and see how different it is. So that's the grade. I'm just going to show you the type of questions. In the first quiz, we didn't have any questions about precipitation and collection. So here, since I told Claude that my students' misconceptions are mainly about precipitation and collection, and I asked him to target the question on these two misconceptions. So you see in question one, you have which sentence best describes precipitation, in sentence two, which sentence best describes collection, just to make sure that students know exactly what precipitation is and what collection is. In the third question, students have to fill in the blank with the correct word, either precipitation and collection. Even in the fourth question, there are true or false questions where students should circle the answer. So each one of the question enables the teacher to check exactly students' understanding of these two concepts. So the fifth and seventh questions also revolve around the two terms that students have misconceptions on. Also, you have question 7, and also you have diagram labeling. So here, students have the water cycle, and they have to label the diagram by using the word bank to write the correct term next to each letter, A, B, C, D. I have another question where students have to diagram the label again, and notice that this labeling of the diagram B is targeted directly to precipitation and collection concepts. And finally, I have an open-ended reflection question where students should explain the difference between the two terms and use an example from their own life or neighborhood to help explain the answer. So, same topic, same tool, completely different results. And the difference isn't in Claude itself, because Claude can meet exactly the requirements of the teacher. The difference is in the prompt. In this chapter, I'm going to teach you exactly how to write prompts like that second one, which led me to this outcome, very rich outcome. And I'm going to explain exactly that Claude consistently gives you output that is actually useful in your classroom. That's a little introduction to our tutorial today. So whether this is your first time watching this series of tutorials or you've jumped straight to this chapter, you're in the right place. Chapter 2 of our series is going to be about prompting. Prompting is simply the way you communicate with Claude. What you type into that box, and it is without question the simple, most important skill for getting value out of this tool. Here is the honest truth. Claude is extraordinarily capable, but it cannot read your mind. If you give it a very vague instruction, like make a quiz about the water cycle, it will give you a vague result, a vague test, a vague quiz. The good news is that prompting well is not complicated. Why? Because there are 4 things you need to include in almost every prompt, and once you know them, you will use them automatically. Today, I'm going to show you what those 4 things are, then demonstrate them across 6 real teaching scenarios, 3 focused on lesson planning and classroom materials, and 3 others focused on student feedback and assessment. Let's start with the framework. The framework I'm going to explain today is called the 4 C's framework. Every great prompt has 4 elements. I call them the 4 C's. These 4 elements are the context, content, constraints, and the format. So first of all, we're going to start with the context. What do I mean with context? Context is who you are. I teach grade 6 science. This is who I am, who my students are, and where I am in the curriculum. Without context, Claude has to guess. When it guesses, it defaults to the average, which is usually too simple, too complex, or completely off target for your specific class. Context sounds like this: I teach for year 4 English, or I teach year 6 English. My students are strong readers but struggle with writing in full sentences. 1 or 2 sentences explaining the context, but they transform everything that follows. That's what I mean with the context. That's C1. The second C is about the content. Content is the specific topic or task you want Claude to work on. Here, I'm teaching the water cycle. That's my content. I have to be as specific as I can. If I ask Claude to provide me something about fractions, that is not content. If I ask Claude to provide me with the following content about adding fractions with unlike denominators, that is specific content. 1 or 2 sentences to provide Claude with a brief overview about the content, but they transform everything that follows. So the more specific my content is, the more targeted the output will be. The third C in the 4 C's framework is the constraints. What do I mean by constraints? Constraints are the boundaries and requirements your output must meet. Things like the length. I need a 1-page handout. I need a 10-question quiz, not a quiz simply, but a 10-question quiz, a 15-question quiz. The second constraint, in addition to the length, is the difficulty. For example, I need a quiz that is appropriate for mixed ability learners, or that is designed for advanced learners. Another constraint is if you have any specific requirements, such as the quiz must include a worked example, or I need Claude to avoid multiple choice. I want Claude to design questions where the answers are short answers only. So constraints are where most teachers undersell themselves. You know exactly what you need, tell Claude. So once you know exactly what you want Claude to provide you with, then detail it. Provide as many details as possible. The fourth C is the format. The format means how you want the output to be structured and presented. Do you want a lesson plan with numbered steps? Do you want a rubric as a table? Do you want feedback as a paragraph? Claude will default to a reasonable format if you don't specify. But if you have something specific in mind, say so. It takes 3 words. Format this as a table. Write this as bullet points. So, again, let us repeat the 4 C's in the framework: context plus content plus constraints plus format. Now, I want to provide you with 6 live demos with Claude. Let's start with the most common requests. Watch how I build the prompt using all 4 elements. First of all, I'm going to provide you with a prompt that is suitable for grade 5 student. So that's the first demo. It's demo 1 for math teachers. I'll explain the prompt in detail. So I just pasted in the box what I teach exactly. I teach grade 5 mathematics. That's the context. My students have just been introduced to fractions. So I'm beginning with fractions, and they can identify numerators and denominators, but have not yet encountered equivalent fractions. Also, more details about my students. Several students in my class have learning support needs and benefit from visual presentation. So here I provided Claude with the context, who my students are, and the constraints. They like to have visual representations of the concepts. Now, what do I want Claude to create for me? What content am I requesting? Create a 45-minute lesson plan. That's the constraint because I'm delimiting the time on introducing equivalent fractions. That includes a concrete opening activity using visual models, a guided practice segment, and an independent task with 3 difficulty levels: the foundation, the core, and the extension. So here you have the content plus the constraint. Again, so sometimes I mix between the context and the constraint. Sometimes I provide Claude with both details about the content and the constraint. And finally, I have the format, formatted as a structured lesson plan with clear timings for each segment. This is exactly how I want the structured lesson to be presented, or how I want my lesson plan to be structured, because I need clear timings for each segment. Notice I told Claude the grade level. I told Claude the prior knowledge and the specific learning need in my class. My students are visual learners. The last detail means the output will naturally include visual strategies without me having to ask separately. So I don't need to ask separately Claude to provide me with this in the same prompt. I explain to Claude exactly what I want. Now I'm waiting for the output to appear. In the output I received, I have 3 tiered independent tasks: the foundation, the core, and the extension, exactly as requested. This is ready to use or to refine into or more exchanges. So if you look at the activities, You have a specification of the timing, 45 minutes for, I have the prior knowledge, I have the new concept that I'm explaining, I have a list of learning objectives, the materials I need, the opening of the material that's divided into segments, the concrete opening activities with the focus of each one of the segments, the direct instruction modeling, the guided practice for each one. The timing is specified, the independent task, the closure and exit ticket. And then I have details for each one of the activity. And since my students are visual learners, so you have diagrams, you have circles, you have guided practice and independent task with three tiers, the foundation, the core, and the extension. You have exactly what you wanted. And then you have the closure and the exit ticket. You can download this lesson and you will have everything that you want. Now let's move to demo 2 of 6. And the second demo is going to be focused on language teaching, reading comprehension in specific. I need to write the prompt here. As we said, first of all, we start with the context. I'm a year 8 English teacher. My class is reading of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. That's the context, what I'm teaching exactly. And we're focusing on the theme of loneliness this week. That's the content. I need a reading comprehension worksheet on chapter 3. This is what I need exactly, produced at 3 reading levels because I need to have a differentiated instruction in my class. Why? Because some of my students read below grade level. They need simplified vocabulary and sentence completion questions. One of my students is at grade level with open response questions. And one last part of the lesson is going to be addressed to advanced readers with higher order thinking questions that ask students to connect the theme to the wider context of 1930s America. I still have a certain constraint because I want the reading comprehension worksheet to be formatted for each level in its own clearly labeled section on a single page. So the format, the 3 sections, Claude will prepare exactly 3 pages, 1 page for each level, as I requested clearly. So notice, if you just look at my prompt, it specifies the context, it clearly specifies the content, and I have a little mention of some of the constraints I want in the output and its format. And here it is. So in few seconds, I got exactly what I wanted. So that's for level 1, the foundation level. I have the word bank. Notice that there are simple vocabulary and there is a simple fill in the blank exercise where students need to use the vocabulary just for me to check their comprehension of mice and men. And in the second level, I have students at grade level, so I don't have a word bank. I only have a list of questions that students should answer in full sentences, and they should use examples from the chapter I explained to support their ideas. In level 3, extension, so students need to answer not only in sentences but in well-developed paragraphs, and they need to connect the events in the chapter to the wider social and historical context of the 1930s America. You have synthesis question, and each one of the question is written on 1 page exactly as I requested. That's the second demo. So you have 3 tiered task or levels. And this is a task that used to take me 45 minutes minimum, and watch what comes back. 3 differentiated worksheets, exactly one prompt, but one detailed one. And the language in the below grade level section is noticeably simpler than the language of the last level. Claude has calibrated that automatically from the constraint I specified in my prompt. Let's move on to demo number 3, and this is going to be focused on teaching geography. So I have a detailed prompt. I need to paste the prompt to Claude, and I want you to show exactly the 4 C's. The first C, as we said, is the context. I teach secondary school geography for year 10. We have just finished a unit on climate change causes and effects, and students need to consolidate their understanding before a summative assessment that is going to be given next week. That's the context plus the content, which class exactly, which grade level, what I'm teaching. That's the content and what we're willing to do. I want you to design a 20-minute structured discussion activity. That's the constraint because I'm specifying the timing for the discussion activity. And I want this activity to give every student a speaking role, to encourage them to use subject-specific vocabulary. And I want this activity to end with a written exit ticket that I can use to quickly assess who is ready for the assessment and who needs further support. That's the constraint of the activity. What about the format? I want you to format it as a step-by-step teacher guide with timings and suggested student grouping. So again and again, every time I'm designing a prompt, I'm specifying the context at the beginning, then I'm detailing the content and relating it to the context, especially what my students know or what they need to consolidate in their understanding. Then I specify the constraints because I don't want an activity that is a 10-page long activity. I need an activity that can be covered in 20 minutes in class. And I also specify the format. So here you have a valid 4-page document. The climate change causes and effect, everything is ready. This is for year 10 geography. 20-minute structured discussion. It functions as a teacher's guide. There is also a grouping for a student, and the objective is to consolidate student understanding before giving them the summative assessment. And every student has one speaking role. These are the purposes of the activity. These are the materials. This is the lesson as at a glance with the timing and the phase and the grouping of students. And then we have step 2, silent think time, and step 3, structured role discussion. You have the role and the job for the cause reporter and for the effect reporter, and there is a role for the vocabulary checker and for the connector, the scribe. You have also the whole class popcorn chair, and the last step includes an individual written exit ticket specifically as required in the prompt. So the exit ticket at the end, that's assessment intelligence built directly into a discussion activity, and that's the kind of pedagogical thinking that takes experience to build. Claude applied it here because the constraint was specific enough to require it. Now let's move on to the fourth demo. The fourth demo is for English teachers, and in this fourth demo I'm going to specify, as usually said earlier, I'm a year 9 English teacher, and I've just marked a student's persuasive essay. The student has a strong central argument and good use of evidence, but the paragraphs lack clear topic sentences, and the student overuses the word also as a connective. So these are the contextual data that Claude should know about the student before designing the activity. What I want Claude to is to write a half-page feedback comment. That's the constraint, because I just need half a page, not a full page. And I want this comment to open by genuinely acknowledging the strongest part of the student's argument, to identify the two areas for improvement clearly but constructively, and to give one concrete example of how to improve the topic sentence. I want the comment to end with a specific target for the next piece. I want Claude to write in a warm, encouraging tone that is appropriate to a 13-year-old. So here is my student, and here is the essay, the summary of the essay, and the tone and the technical accuracy and the overall impression as I commented on the essay. So I provided Claude with my student essay to get feedback exactly on students' writing. So I don't want a general feedback. I want feedback that is exactly tailored to what my student has written. I pinpointed the strong arguments of my student, and I highlighted the weaknesses, like, for example, the lack of clear topic sentences and the overuse of a certain connective. And I also specified the format and the constraint plus the essay. So here the feedback is addressed to my student, and it starts with the opening line of the essay. How many hours have you lost today to a screen? That's genuinely brilliant. This is a command. It grabs the reader immediately, and from there your essay stays confident and clear about exactly where you stand. So here is a comment about the counter-argument paragraph. Claude is acknowledging the strength of the argument, because the student chose the freedom of expression argument before pushing back on it, which shows a real persuasive instinct. But there are two things to work on next. The first thing to work on is that each of the body paragraph opens with either social media and also, which means you have to read a few lines before you know what point that paragraph is actually making. So take your cyberbullying paragraph. It starts with also social media is a place where people, etc. But it doesn't make yet an argument. This is a replacement of the introduction to the paragraph. Cyberbullying, enabled by social media, poses a serious risk to young people. Second, also appears 14 times in the essay, so it's doing a lot of heavy lifting, varying the connective and replacing, for example, also with furthermore, consequently. This is compounded by. This will make the argument feel like it's building rather than just adding one fact after another. So your target as a student for next time is to open every paragraph with a topic sentence that makes a claim, not just a topic, and use at least 4 different connectives across your essay instead of relying on also only. So your ideas are already strong, and this will help your writing show that of properly. So you see, if you look at the output that I received, you notice that I told Claude both the strength and the weaknesses of my student, and I told it the student's age. That age detail is very important because it shapes the tone of the entire response. That feedback that I got is genuinely warm, specific and actionable, exactly as I requested. I would read it, adjust any phrasing that doesn't sound like me, and that's a complete feedback comment in under 2 minutes only. And I can really rely on it with little changes if I want. Now let's move on to the fifth demo for science teachers to show them exactly the four C's: the context, the content, the constraints, and the format. I teach primary school science, year 3, that's the context. My students have just completed a unit on plants, and they understand what plants need to grow, but often confuse the function of roots and leaves. That's the context, and I specified to Claude the specific misconceptions they have because they confuse between the functions of roots and leaves. What I want Claude to prepare for me is a 10-question formative assessment. That's the constraint because I want the formative assessment to include only 10 questions. And I want these questions to include 4 picture-based questions, 4 questions based on a picture, 4 true or false questions with a 1-sentence justification required, and 2 short answer questions. That's the constraint. I also want Claude to include an answer key and to flag which questions specifically target the roots versus leaves misconception. So I'm tailoring the formative assessment to meet with the students' misconceptions. And I also want Claude to use simple language that is appropriate for 7 to 8-year-olds. So that's again the constraints concerning the format and related to the context I'm creating this formative assessment for. So that is for primary school science. And what I'm expecting labels for questions, and each one of the labels should target the specific misconception I already named in the prompt. That means when I'm marking, I know exactly which answers to look at in order to diagnose that misunderstanding. So Claude is architecturing the misconception and it's targeting the assessment with integrated visuals because I asked Claude to include 4 picture-based questions. So we're going to see how the images are embedded in the document. Here is the output. That's a formative quiz or a formative assessment about plants and roots, leaves. So look at the picture question. So you have a picture and questions on this picture targets exactly the function of each part of the plant, the job of part A, B, C, and D. You have another picture, plant 1 and plant 2, the roots pulled out of the soil, and plant 1. So you have 2 different pictures with true or false questions. You also have short answer questions, and you have the answer keys for each one of them. So I have exactly what I wanted. Each one of the parts of the formative assessment is labeled, and each one of them targets one specific misconception, the functions of the roots and the functions of the leaves. So when I mark my students' texts, I know exactly which answers to look and to diagnose if this misunderstanding has been solved or not. Now the last demo is going to be targeted to history teacher at the secondary level. That's the prompt I'm going to provide Claude with. So context, my context is I'm a year 11 history teacher. I'm setting a source analysis essay of 600 to 800 words on the reliability and utility of primary sources from the First World War. That's the content. I want you to create a marking rubric. That's the constraints. Just a marking rubric with 4 criteria: source analysis, use of historical context, quality of the arguments, and written communication. These are also constraints about the rubric. Each criterion I've just listed should have 4 performance level: excellent, proficient, developing, and beginning, with 2 or 3 sentences of descriptor for each level. So these are the 4 levels of performance, and I want for each level 2 to 3 sentences of descriptor. Another constraint is format it as a clean table that I can paste directly into a Word document. So this is another constraint for the requirement concerning the format, because I want to copy it and to paste it directly in a Word document. That's the source analysis essay. That's a marking rubric. These are the criteria, the 4 criteria I've just listed: source analysis, use of historical context, etc. These are the 4 performance levels: excellent, proficient, developing, beginning. And these are the 2 to 3 sentence descriptor for each level. So I have a complete 4 criteria rubric with 16 descriptors. I have a table format ready to paste. I got it in 10 seconds only, and that's the power of combining all 4 elements in a single well-constructed prompt. Before I close this tutorial, I want to highlight 3 most common mistakes that I see teachers make with prompting. The first error is that some teachers are too vague. For example, they write prompts like "make a lesson about fractions," which gives Claude nothing to work with. So what I advise is to always include your grade level, your students' prior knowledge, and the specific outcome you need. Another error is asking for everything at once without structure. If you need a lesson plan, a worksheet, a quiz, and a rubric, then ask for them one at a time, or use a numbered list within your prompt. A third error is accepting the first output without iterating. Claude's first response is a draft, not a final product. And the real power comes from the follow-up. Make the quiz harder, make the quiz easier. Rewrite the feedback in a more formal tone. Each follow-up sharpens the output. And that's chapter 2. You now have the 4 C's framework: the context, constraints, content, and format. And you've seen it applied across 6 real classroom scenarios. From this point forward, every prompt you write should include all 4 elements. It will take an extra 30 seconds, and it will save you an extra 30 minutes. The teachers who get the most out of Claude are not the ones who use it most. They are the ones who are most precise about what they need. You already know your students better than any AI ever will. The prompting framework is just a way of transferring that knowledge into Claude's hands. In chapter 3, we will look at files and documents and how to upload your own materials and have Claude work with them directly. See you there. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions and comments, please post them here.